Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. Here's a riddle for you. If you report to training camp but no one is there, did you really report to training camp? If you finally decide to come to the team facility, but none of the other players are there, none of the coaches are there, and none of the management is there, did you really come to the team facility? Seems like a somewhat weird question that I'm not even sure the NFL knew the answer to. However, when we're talking about the 1994 New York Giants, this seemingly silly and ridiculous hypothetical scenario was the biggest question of their entire offseason. This is fullback Jarrod Bunch. When the Giants drafted him in 1991, they were hoping that he could be a strong and productive running back that could help out the offense, improve an already strong rushing attack, and help the Giants continue to compete in the NFC and win Super Bowl titles. Instead, what followed was an injury-plagued career where he was not very effective, and where the grand finale was one of the strangest incidents you're ever going to see. In 1994, Jarrod Bunch held out in absolutely bizarre fashion, and let's just say it did not work out in his favor. This is the story behind one of the strangest holdouts in Giants history. Before I talk about the incident in question, we need some context to understand just who Jarrod Bunch is, why the Giants drafted him in the first place, and why his career was on thin ice before the holdout. In the late 80s and at the start of the 1990s, there was an absolute bulldozer in the Michigan backfield. Michigan had a lot of quality runners that made it into the NFL during this era, from Leroy Hoard to John Vaughn, but Jarrod Bunch might have been the best of them all considering just how valuable his skill set was. It's part of why he was named the captain during his senior season in 1990. If you needed a man to get a yard in a short yardage situation, or you needed a man that was going to be able to plow his way through a linebacker or defensive lineman, Bunch was definitely your guy. Perhaps his best season was that final year, when on 103 carries, he had 515 yards, averaging 5 yards per carry. Remember that this is a big running back or fullback that we're talking about here. For a guy like that to average 5 yards per carry is absurd. He found the end zone 6 times, making his presence felt in the running game, the blocking game, and even in the receiving game. He had 2 second-half touchdowns in 1989 to beat Ohio State, including the dagger with under 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter. And in 1990, he finished inside the top 10 of the Big Ten in yards per attempt. Having a 6'2", 250-pound fullback was definitely seen as an enticing option by NFL teams, and it was very clear after Bunch graduated that he was going to get some looks early on in the NFL draft. And one of those teams looking was the New York Giants. Obviously, the Giants were the defending Super Bowl champion, so they didn't exactly have too many needs. The running game was really strong, and was a big reason why they won the Super Bowl. They finished 8th in rushing yards and 7th in rushing touchdowns, had a first-round pick from 1990 that showed a ton of potential in Ronnie Hampton, and had Otis Anderson, who, while on the older side, was still playing well, and was named the MVP of the Super Bowl. But longtime fullback Maurice Carthon was entering his 30s, and especially with free agency rules changing, the Giants were looking to the future, and thought that improving the position was the way to go. With that, they took Jarrod Bunch with the 27th pick in the 1991 NFL Draft, and Bunch was trading one shade of blue for another. However, despite the lofty expectations and the high draft status, Bunch's career didn't start off according to plan. Bunch barely played for the Giants as a rookie outside of special teams. He only had 1 rushing attempt, which he got no yards off of. And while I don't want to say he was necessarily in the doghouse, let's just say you're not going to convince the coaching staff to give you a lot of reps early on if on your second touch in the NFL, which came against the Dallas Cowboys in Week 5, you fumble the ball and it gets returned for a touchdown. It was an admittedly shaky season for Bunch. Head coach Ray Hanley noted that when the Giants drafted him, he didn't expect there to be any problem transitioning to the NFL, but that did not happen. But in 1992, when Carthon was no longer on the team and occupying the fullback spot, Bunch was finally able to get into the fold and get an increase in playing time. To be fair, Bunch was alright during that 1992 campaign. He ran the ball 104 times for 501 yards, averaging over 4.8 yards per carry. He was averaging close to 6 yards per carry during the month of October, and scored 2 touchdowns in the process. He had an exceptional performance in a nationally televised Saturday game against the Kansas City Chiefs, where he ran 10 times for 84 yards and showed off that trucking ability of his that got him drafted in the first place. And his 4.8 yards per carry over the course of the entire season ranked 3rd in the entire NFL amongst all qualified runners, only behind Heath Sherman on the Philadelphia Eagles and Ricky Watters on the San Francisco 49ers. In fact, his season was so impressive that amongst Giants runners to have at least 100 carries, Bunch had the highest yards per carry average since Ernie Coy all the way back in 1963. At the time, it was the best average from a high-volume runner in franchise history in the post-merger era. However, even though his career looked like it was heading in a somewhat promising direction, it came crashing down in 1993 when Dan Reeves became the head coach, replacing the often criticized Ray Hanley. and Reeves, who had no attachment to Bunch whatsoever, didn't really see the need to play him a lot, and didn't see how he fit into the offense. This was especially true after he had to miss 3 games with a severe bronchial infection, which was so bad that he would cough violently every time he took a breath. Without Bunch in there, the Giants were winning, and they shocked everyone by making it to the postseason. Bunch accepted his reduced role over that 1993 season, when he had just 33 carries for 128 yards, and said, "Definitely I would love to play more, but there's no complaint. We're winning, and that's what counts. I don't necessarily like the situation, but the team comes first. I can't be selfish." But after what happened in 1993, it definitely seemed like he was on thin ice with the Giants. And that's where things get incredibly bizarre. When 1994 rolled around, Bunch, who was on the roster bubble, had one mission to Reeves. He wanted to prove to Reeves that he belonged on the field and that he belonged in the offense. Especially now that Lewis Tillman, the second leading rusher on the team, was in Chicago, there was a bit of a vacancy that needed to be filled, and Bunch wanted to be the one to fill it. However, things got off to a bit of a shaky start in the offseason. Bunch was unhappy with his agent, Lamont Smith, because he wasn't getting a lot of work off the field. He wanted to be in television commercials, and nobody seemed to want him. Smith was replaced by Tom Condon, and under Condon, the first order of business was to hold out. When you're on the roster bubble, holding out seems like an incredibly bold strategy. There were 2 very conflicting reasons for the holdout, and which one is accurate and the real reason, I'm not sure, because the New York Times reported on both of them. Reason 1 had to do with money. Bunch was offered $500,000 by the Giants, and he thought that was pretty low, especially since the average NFL salary was somewhere in the ballpark of $628,000, and the average salary in 1993 was even higher than that at over $666,000. Bunch reportedly wanted slightly above the league average, and was looking for somewhere between $700,000 and $800,000. Unsurprisingly, the Giants didn't really want to give that to him, especially with a salary cap. Why would the Giants want to pay a guy above the league average who doesn't fit into the offense, has a bit of an injury history, and might be cut? Reason 2 had nothing to do with money, and this is the one that Bunch supposedly claimed afterwards. Bunch had arthroscopic surgery in the offseason on his knee. The Giants initially thought that all Bunch needed was surgery on one knee. Turns out, not only did Bunch need surgery on both knees, but he also needed surgery on his big toe. Condon and Bunch were not on the same page whatsoever. Condon said that Bunch was ready to play football now and was fully recovered, but Bunch said that he wanted to continue rehabbing in California with a martial arts expert, and that he wasn't ready to come to camp yet until he was 100%, because he didn't want Reeves to see him at anything less than his best. But at this point, the Giants didn't care about that. They just wanted to see him, period. They issued him a 5-day letter, which said that he had to report by the team's 3rd preseason game. If he did not report, then he would automatically miss the first regular season game, and wouldn't be paid for any games that he missed. After receiving the letter, Bunch decided to finally report. The only problem? No one was there. At the end of the 5-day period, Bunch flew in from California to New Jersey. The threat worked, and he was ready to suit up for whatever was left of camp in the preseason. But when Bunch arrived at the team's camp at Fairleigh Dickinson University, no one was there. Naturally, Bunch did the next best thing, and reported to the team's offices at Giants Stadium. Once again, no one was there. The players, the coaches, and the front office were all in Germany, where the Giants were scheduled to take on the Chargers in Berlin in an international exhibition game. Now there was an even bigger feud between Bunch and the Giants. On one hand, Bunch argued that he followed all the rules. The rules said that when a player receives a 5-day letter, that they should report to the training camp site, and he did just that. Plus, you can't expect an NFL player to fly out of the country by himself. Asking a player training out in California to have to fly on his own dime and meet the team in Berlin halfway around the world seems a bit unreasonable. On the other hand, General Manager George Young said that Bunch violated the rules. Training camp was being held in Berlin because of this game, and because of this, Bunch had to report to Berlin. So just to recap where we are right now, we have a player who is reporting to training camp where training camp is usually held, and the team is saying that's not good enough, because the training site isn't in New Jersey, but rather is an additional 4,000 miles east of that. You're not really a training camp if you're not with the team. Safe to say by this point, Bunch did not fly out to Berlin, as when you factor in the expenses with the timing and the whole messiness of the situation, he and his agent thought that it would be best to just stay in New Jersey and wait for the team to return. However, as you can probably expect, Bunch's tenure with the Giants, which was already on thin ice, was about as close to collapsing as possible. When the team returned to New Jersey following their 20-20 victory over the Chargers, Bunch joined them. Bunch met with the press and talked about how he held out because he wanted to come to camp at 100% and wanted to be in the best shape possible. Then again, he said football-wise, the only way to be in shape is to be playing football. which he wasn't doing at California, so I'm not sure I get the contradiction here. But while Bunch was enthusiastic, Reeves seemed less so, saying, "I wish we could have had him here 4 or 5 weeks ago. He's got to work hard to catch up. This makes it more difficult for him." Not so subtle way of saying that Bunch is on the bubble. And that bubble quickly popped. Shortly after returning to practice, he was placed on the physically unable to perform list with a pulled hamstring. Reeves seemingly reached his breaking point, saying he needs to get in pads and start competing. If it doesn't happen soon, it's going to be too late. As we would find out a week later, it was a week too late, as Reeves cut Bunch, saying it just looked like he was never going to get healthy. Bunch was not on Reeves' good side, and it showed. After just 3 seasons, the former first-round pick was cut by the team that drafted him. He's one of the bigger busts in Giants history, and there was no redemption arc here, as although he would sign with the Raiders a few days later, he never touched the ball and was out of the league completely by the middle of the 1994 season. This whole scenario, though, was nothing short of bizarre. A player holding out and then reporting to camp, only for the whole team to be at a completely different location. Bunch threatened to file a grievance about the whole thing, but considering the fact that he was off the team a few days later and never touched the ball again, this issue came and went. When the Giants drafted Jarrod Bunch and put their faith in him, they were hoping that he was going to give them a bunch of wins and a bunch of success in the running game. Instead, all he gave them was a bunch of headaches, a bunch of trouble, and as evidenced by the bizarre way his career ended, a bunch of confusion. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 PM Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at Jarrod Gator 9 and subscribe to 60-second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters helping with the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.